After direct appropriation in form of money, kind, and rent.
Thank you.
No, money, labor, money, kind, which equals rent, all of them. Twiddle means corresponds to. Okay, any more? All right, are there any questions about this? Yes, Josephine. Shh.
Capitalism, form an external function. Can you expand on the first one, or that didn't occur to me? Feudalism, how exactly?
Well, feudalism, because the surplus is separated, politics is it's a good question. Politics is directly implicated because the surplus is visible, and therefore you have to either use forcible means or ideological means to justify its extraction. There's in principle no reason to do more work than for the necessary labor. They know they're in a sense being exploited even if they don't use that vocabulary. So basically what we're saying is that justification, legitimation, and force is of the essence of feudalism. Now, when we have a situation of capitalism where the surplus is necessary and visible, it's sort of, at first approximation, reproduces itself of itself. Workers have to come to work, they produce their wage, and they produce the surplus, the necessary surplus. So it works of itself. But there are external, basically the state, politics, ideology operate to sort of do some coordination among capitalists, or to perhaps organize struggle in some ways. That's where politics and ideology is an external function, external to the relations of production. Whereas in feudalism it's intimately bound into. It's all because of the invisibility of exploitation. In principle, capitalism just goes on by itself, reproduces itself. And that of course is the mythology that we operate under in this country, seemingly. As somehow deregulation. Capitalism just keeps on going. Of course it turns out, for reasons we will discover later today and tomorrow, that in fact, because capitalism has a certain specific dynamics, that you actually do need to have this intervention of the state. And in fact, we live in a period where the state becomes ever more important. And so, in fact, the state becomes not just external, but internally involved ultimately. But Marx and Engels saw capitalism first and foremost as distinct from feudalism, reproducing itself of itself. And the trouble perhaps today is that the state thinks like Marx and Engels, that capitalism somehow will just automatically reproduce itself of itself. But capitalism has its own dynamics, transforms itself, and requires in the end all forms of state regulation. Okay. Going, gone. Right. No more questions. It's clear. Very good. Good. What's your name? Jamie Lou. Very good. Thank you very much for this water. The least I can do is remember your name. Jamie Lou. Okay. Now, I want to summarize with that's the second point, wage, labor, and capital. This is I believe, a fascinating, it took me many years to figure this pamphlet document out, but I think it's brilliant. It's two parts to this. There's parts 1 to 4, and then there's part 5. Parts 1 to 4 is really is imagining that capitalism is a single capitalist and a single, in a sense, labor force. That's what parts 1 to 4 is all about. And what does Marx say in parts 1 to 4? Well, essentially what parts 1 to 4 is all about the fact that capitalists exploit labor. But, what they say in parts 1 to 4, the maximal expansion of capitalism is to the benefit of workers. Workers will benefit as capitalism expands, because as it expands, what happens? More jobs are created, there's a bigger demand for labor, and labor is able to bargain for higher wages. Everybody benefits. That is, even though there is exploitation of labor by capital, nonetheless, the maximal expansion of capital is the best situation for labor. And then the whole thing is turned on its head. The whole argument is turned on its head in part 5. Because there we talk not about a single capitalist, but what? The capitalist class, that involves what? Capitalist class involves, Simeon? Competition among whom? Capitalists. That is, also as we'll see, competition among workers, but there's definitely competition among capitalists. And that transforms our understanding of capitalism. It's so funny when you read, the Wall Street Journal sometimes, and you read the editorials, you would think there was a single capitalist, and that was good for, that single capitalist is good for everybody. And insofar as there is a single capitalist, that's true. But it turns out that wonderful thing called competition really messes things up. Because what does competition do? Competition among capitalists. What do they compete for? What are they competing for? What are they competing for? Yes, true. Lauren. Okay. They compete for capital, yes, but what ultimately is the measure of their success? Profit. They compete for profit. And the profit comes from where, Lauren? It comes from, the origin of profit is
Exploitation.
And that's surplus labor, right? So the strategy of the capitalists is to compete for profit. So how do they increase their profit? They increase it by increasing their surplus value. How do they do that? How do they do that? How do they do that? How do they increase their surplus? We did it last time. Jenny? Well, that's right. I think for Marx and Engels, the most important thing is the invention of machines. But one can also immediately also see different ways. That's the key one. But if we have a figure like this, how do you expand this or reduce this? You want to expand this or reduce this, right? So to expand this, well, one way is to length of the working day. And that's, of course, what they did in the 19th century. And they have all sorts of subtle ways of doing it even today. Even today. It's amazing. The number of labor laws that are violated and how people work extra overtime and paid zero. I mean, anybody here worked overtime and not being paid for it? Whoa, crumbs. Wow. That's interesting. So you probably know you're being exploited then. That's interesting. Put your hands up again. Wow. We should have a little questionnaire about this. This is amazing. That is amazing. Can somebody, what job have you had where you work overtime but not being paid for it? Tutoring. Tutoring math for students, high school students. And you're paid an hourly wage, but you're not paid for all your hours. Yeah, what about those poor GSIs? Yes, what about it, Mike?
Everything over 20 hours.
But do you work over 20 hours? But that extra work is for your own benefit, right?
Cultivation of his many talents.
The cultivation of his realm of freedom, the realm of freedom. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, actually, there are some interesting surveys occurring at the moment in Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York, all about precisely this, the labor violations. Of course, according to the law, you should be paid for all your hours. Yeah. Anybody else? I mean, anybody got some good examples of this? Some outrageous examples? Anybody got one? Yes, Matthew?
Well, this couple years back, Wells Fargo was hiring people who should have been wage laborers as salaried employees, and they were making them work extended hours. There was eventually lost employment.
Yes, but I'm talking about people's individual experiences here. Yes, but Katie?
I dated that person for a while, and the last week that I dated that, they never paid me for it.
So this is the informal labour market here. Yes, indeed. That's very often an area. Anybody where is a more formal labour market? Where? I know what formal means. Yes, Rosa?
I work as a student assistant, but sometimes I go into the office to do my own work, and then it's like, oh, can you do this? Can you help me with this?
So they pester you all the time to do extra work. Yeah. Well, anyway, it happens all over the place. But anyway, that's one way. That's very interesting. That's one way, is to extend the length of the working day. Another way is to reduce the wage. And how do we do that? Well, one way is, according to Marx and Engels, is leaving machines aside for the time being. Yes, Alex. Yes. Well, he says that on page 217. What to introduce family labour? How does that work? Right. So if the man is getting $60 an hour, yes, the man is getting $60 an hour, but then suddenly the man, the wife, and the child are being employed. They only have to get $20 an hour. So perhaps we should make it $6 an hour and $2 an hour. Okay. So that's a way of reducing the wage, by spreading the family wage among more than one member of the family, which is precisely what happened in the 19th century, and which Marx refers to, and which has happened systematically since the Second World War in this country. These double-earner families, it's just not possible to live without two-earner families in most strata of this society. Yes, Rosa?
I don't get how that would be. Does, the employer tell the family that the wife is going to get $20 and that the father's going to get $20, or are they just
Essentially what the argument is you need $6 an hour to survive the family. If one person is employed, gets $6. If three people, then $2. So it's basically the argument is that competition among capitalists will drive down the wage to the minimum necessary for existence. And if you employ three people, then you don't only have to pay $2 each. That's the argument. Yes, Sonny?
If a man comes in and wants to work for a corporation and his wife comes in separately and says that she's not his wife, will she get her own wage?
Yes, well, in the 19th century, what happened is the man would actually bring wife and children to work, and it was all very clear. Now, hold on, in the 19th century. Now, you're suggesting that what has happened essentially over time, after the Second World War, that wages have, in a sense, in relationship to the cost of living, have not advanced as quickly, and so the assumption is, amongst all employers, that you've got double earning wages. You've got two earner families. So, yes, it may well, and so it doesn't presume that those two earners are employed by the same employer, not at all. But the assumption is that there will be a second earner in the family, for a majority of the families in the United States. So you don't have to be employed in the same firm at all. The assumption is you've got to have two earnings. I mean, isn't this true? I mean, are your families like this or not? Yeah. Yeah, Juliana?
So I'll give you another way to reduce the need.
Yeah.
In competition, they try to specialize, like advance the division of labor even further so that the labor becomes more and more simplified. And so the worth of like unnecessary labor goes down, and so their wage will be
Right. So basically, it's what they call, what Marx calls simplification. We might call it de-skilling. Therefore, workers are de-skilled. Therefore, it costs less to produce their labor power because it's unskilled labor power. You pay them less. It also means they're more easily replaced because you don't have to be a skilled worker to replace a skilled worker. Any unskilled worker can replace an unskilled worker, and so the power of workers also diminishes. That's right. That's a very important one. But that's all right. Those are our series on. We could talk about others. For example, the migration of capital to areas where the cost of living is lower, therefore wages are lower, or the use of migrant labor in this country. There are many ways. But let's talk about innovation as new machinery. New machinery. Now what does Marx, it embraces all these things in a way. There is, alright, that's just innovation as I put it here. Specialization, let's call it simplification. That's part of the new machinery. And for Marx, introducing new machinery actually leads to de-skilled, simplified labor, interestingly. And then we have, as we said before, family labor, on page 217. Right. So these innovations, they all lead to what? Increased competition among workers. Right. He says this on 214. Let me read that to you. 214. Somebody read it for me. Who will... Mary Ann. 214. Let's see. Why don't we start? Why don't we actually start in the new paragraph? The new paragraph begins whatever. You there? Into that paragraph, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines into it. Yeah.
While therefore competition continually pursues him with the law of cost reduction, and every weapon that he forges against his rivals recoils against himself, the capitalist continually tries to get better of competition by incessantly introducing new machines, more expensive it is true, but producing more cheaply, and the new division of labor in place of the old, by not waiting until competition has rendered the new ones obsolete.
So here we have the capitalist introducing new machines, and this incessantly recoils against the capitalist because every capitalist introduces a new machine, and therefore every capitalist has to introduce a new machine, and so every capitalist has to introduce a new machine, and so every capitalist has to introduce a new machine, right? It incessantly recoils against all capitalists on pain of death. If they don't introduce a new machine, they are dead as capitalists. Go on. No, don't go on. Then go to the missed 2 paragraphs and go to the paragraph beginning the greater division of labor.
The greater division of labor enables one worker to do the work of 5, 10, or 20. It therefore multiplies competition among the workers fivefold.
So this is when you introduce new machines. So what happens when you introduce machines? One worker is able to do the work of 5, 10, or 20. Go on.
It therefore multiplies competition among the workers fivefold, tenfold, and 20-fold. The workers do not only compete by one selling themselves cheaper than another, they compete by one doing the work of 5, 10, 20, and the division of labor introduced by capital and continually increased compels the workers to compete among themselves in this way.
Right, so you've got intensified competition among workers. Continue.
Further, as the division of labor increases, labor is simplified. The special skill of the worker becomes worthless. He becomes transformed into a simple, monotonous, productive force that does not have to use intense bodily or intellectual faculties. His labor becomes a labor that anyone can perform. Hence, competitors crowd upon him on all sides, and besides, we remind the reader that the more simple and easily learned the labor is, the lower the cost of production needed to master it. The lower wages think, for like the price of every other commodity, they are determined by the cost of production.
Very good. Okay, so that's as a result of this, competition among workers, and the result is the lowering of wages. That's the story. That's the story. But one other thing happens. Interestingly. Marx says on page 216, and let me read to you. We talked about the family labor. That's in the 3rd paragraph on 216. And then he says, let us sum up. Conrad, let us sum up.
Let us sum up. The more productive capital grows, the more division of labor and the application of machinery expands. The more the division of labor and the application of machinery expands, the more competition among the workers expands, and the more their wages contract.
Right. That's what we said already. And now read the next paragraph.
In addition, the working class gains recruits from the higher strata of society. Also, a mass of petty industrialists and small rentiers are hurled down into its ranks and have nothing better to do than urgently stretch out their arms alongside those of the workers. Thus, the fortress of uplifted arms demanding work becomes ever thicker, while the arms themselves become even thinner.
What did you say, Christy?
So good.
Isn't it? I mean, the guy's brilliant. I mean, he's a rhetorician.